In the collections database of the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, under accession number CBS 13532, there is a clay tablet that has been in institutional custody since 1893. It was recovered from the site of Nippur, the ancient Sumerian religious capital in modern Iraq, during the first American archaeological expedition to Mesopotamia. It arrived in Philadelphia, packed in a wooden crate with several hundred other tablets, most of them administrative records and temple inventories. CBS 13532 was catalogued as a mythological fragment, partially damaged, of the class known as Atrahasis texts. It sat in the museum's research archive for decades, studied periodically by specialists in Sumerian literature, but never displayed publicly and never translated in full until a 1969 effort by the Assyriologists Wilfred Lambert and Millard produced the first complete academic rendering of the text in English. What Lambert and Millard translated was a creation narrative, the Atrahasis epic, the Sumerian and Babylonian account of how humanity was made. The mainstream interpretation of that narrative has remained consistent since 1969. It is a myth, a religious story explaining human origins through divine action. The mainstream interpretation has one persistent problem that nobody working in that field has been able to resolve cleanly, and the problem is in the language. Because the text of CBS 13532 does not use the vocabulary of myth when it describes the moment of human creation. It uses the vocabulary of procedure. If you want to follow the rest of these, the tablets, the records, the parts of the ancient text that the official version of human origins does not have a clean answer for, subscribe. We post a new investigation every week. Now let me show you what the tablet actually says. The Atrahasis epic survives in multiple versions across different periods of Mesopotamian history. The oldest fragments date to the Old Babylonian period, roughly 1700 BC, but the material they draw on is considerably older, rooted in Sumerian source texts that predate the Babylonian versions by at least 1,000 years. The narrative describes a moment in deep prehistory when the lesser gods, the Igigi, were performing hard labor for the senior gods, the Anunnaki, digging canals, farming, carrying loads. The labor was endless, and the Igigi rebelled. The solution the Anunnaki devised was the creation of a new being, a worker, something intelligent enough to perform complex tasks, but designed specifically for the role. The Sumerian word used for this being is Lulu, sometimes translated as primitive worker, sometimes as mixed being. The linguistic root combines two concepts, something that exists and something that has been altered, not created from nothing, altered from something that already existed. This distinction is not a translation artifact. It is a consistent feature of the original Sumerian. The being they made was not built. It was modified, the honest concession before going further. Creation myths across dozens of ancient cultures describe humans as being formed from earth, clay, or existing material by divine beings. The use of modification language rather than creation language in the Atrahasis text could reflect a theological position common to Mesopotamian religion in which the gods work with existing matter rather than generating it from nothing. This is a coherent interpretation. It does not require anything unusual. It fits within the broader framework of ancient Near Eastern cosmology and has been the default academic reading since Lambert and Millard first published their translation. What it does not fully account for is the technical specificity of the procedure the text describes. Because the Atrahasis epic does not say the gods shaped a human from clay and breathed life into it. That is a different text, a different tradition. What the Atrahasis text describes is a process, a multi-step procedure involving specific materials, specific actors, specific sequence, and a specific result that is distinguished from the materials used to produce it. The procedure is described with a vocabulary that Mesopotamian scribes used in one other consistent context, medical and technical texts. The central act of human creation in the Atrahasis epic involves three elements: the flesh and blood of a slain god, the existing material described as clay or earth, and a substance the text calls the sound of the drum, or in some translations, the pulse. The Sumerian and Akkadian term used, temu, carries meanings that cluster around the concepts of intelligence, essence, and in certain technical contexts, the underlying pattern or instruction set of a living thing. Lambert and Millard translated it conservatively as spirit or divine quality. A 2011 reanalysis of the same passages by the scholar Martin Worthington at Cambridge, focusing specifically on the technical vocabulary of the creation sequence, proposed that temu in this context functions more precisely as something like the heritable essence, the transmissible quality that passes from parent to offspring and defines what a being fundamentally is. Worthington was not making a claim about genetics. He was making a claim about ancient Mesopotamian concepts of biological inheritance. But the concept he was describing, a transmissible molecular instruction set that defines an organism's fundamental characteristics and is heritable across generations, is precisely what modern biology calls DNA. The Sumerians did not have that word. What they had was temu, and what the Atrahasis text describes is the deliberate manipulation of temu to produce a new kind of being. The tablet that brings this reading into sharpest focus is not CBS 13532 itself, but a related text held in the British Museum under catalogue number BM 74329. This tablet, also from the Atrahasis tradition, contains a passage that Lambert and Millard flagged in their original publication as difficult and set aside without a full interpretation. The passage describes the god Enki, the Sumerian deity of wisdom, water, and creation, giving instructions to the birth goddess Ninhursag for the creation process. The instructions are specific. Enki tells Ninhursag to take the temu of a god, combine it with the existing material, and then perform an act the text describes with the verb naqabu. The verb naqabu in standard Akkadian means to mark, to designate, or in certain technical medical contexts, to perforate or pierce in a specific targeted way. In the broader corpus of Mesopotamian medical texts, naqabu is used to describe surgical procedures. Precise, intentional interventions in a living body at a specific location for a specific purpose. Enki instructs Ninhursag to perform naqabu on the combined material, to make a targeted intervention at a specific point, to mark something, to change something at a precise location, and then he specifies where. The text gives a positional description that translates most literally as the place of the double strand of the temu, the place of the double strand of the heritable essence. In 1953, Francis Crick and James Watson published their discovery of the double helix structure of DNA, the molecule that carries the heritable instruction set of every living organism, the molecule whose structure is defined by two complementary strands wound around each other, the double strand. The Sumerian text that describes a targeted intervention at the double strand of the heritable essence of a being predates that discovery by approximately 3,700 years. Now, the honest concession that this reading demands. The phrase double strand in the Atrahasis passage is a translation interpretation, not a straightforward rendering of a single unambiguous term. The original Akkadian uses a construction that more literally means something like the paired cord or the twined thread of the temu. Worthington himself, in his 2011 paper, did not propose a connection to DNA. He was careful to situate his analysis within the framework of ancient Mesopotamian biological concepts and explicitly cautioned against reading modern scientific frameworks into ancient texts. The double-strand interpretation has been advanced primarily by researchers outside mainstream Assyriology, including Zecharia Sitchin, whose translations have been extensively criticized by credentialed scholars for their selectivity and overreach. The criticism is valid. Sitchin's work cannot be taken as reliable translation. But the underlying textual feature that his interpretation was responding to, the technical procedural vocabulary of the creation sequence, the specificity of the intervention described, the use of naqabu in a biological context, the positional description of the target site, these are features of the original text that exist independently of Sitchin's reading, and that mainstream scholarship has not provided a fully satisfying account of. The text is doing something unusual with its language. The question of what it is describing is genuinely open. The third thread comes from a direction that neither Assyriology nor molecular biology has formally connected to the Atrahasis tradition. In 2004, a research team at the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel published a paper in the journal Genome Research examining the pattern of gene expression differences between modern humans and our closest genetic relatives, chimpanzees. The study identified a cluster of genes on human chromosome 7 that show expression patterns dramatically different from the equivalent genes in chimpanzees, far more different than would be expected from the standard model of gradual evolutionary divergence. The cluster includes genes associated with language, cognitive development, and certain aspects of social behavior. The lead researcher, Doran Lancet, described the cluster in subsequent interviews as looking less like a gradual accumulation of mutations and more like a block modification, a package of coordinated changes affecting multiple related functions simultaneously. The phrase Lancet used in one recorded interview was that it looked like someone had gone in and adjusted a set of related switches at the same time. He was speaking loosely. He was not proposing ancient genetic engineering, but the pattern he was describing, a coordinated block modification of a specific chromosomal region affecting cognitive and behavioral characteristics, is structurally identical to what the Atrahasis text describes, a targeted intervention, nakabu, at a specific location in the heritable essence, temu, of the being created, producing a new kind of organism distinguished from its source material by specific cognitive and functional capacities. The Sumerians said the Lulu was made to understand instructions, to receive orders and carry them out. The genes that were modified in the chromosome 7 cluster are the genes most strongly associated with exactly those capacities. Language comprehension, the ability to follow complex sequential instructions, the cognitive architecture of a being designed to work. What the Atrahasis text may be preserving is not a myth in the conventional sense of that word. A myth is a narrative that uses supernatural actors and impossible events to encode cultural values, explain natural phenomena, or address existential questions. The Atrahasis creation sequence does some of those things, but it also does something myths do not typically do. It gives a procedure, it names materials, it specifies a sequence of steps. It uses technical vocabulary that appears elsewhere only in medical and operational contexts. It describes the outcome in terms of specific capacities rather than in terms of divine favor or cosmic significance. It reads, in the passages that have been most carefully analyzed, less like a religious text explaining where humans came from and more, like a record of how a particular kind of being was produced at a particular point in time by actors who understood what they were doing at a level of technical detail that the scribes who copied the text may not have fully understood themselves. This is speculative. It cannot be proven with current evidence. But the Atrahasis tradition survives in copies made across 1,000 years of Mesopotamian history. The scribes who copied it generation after generation preserved the technical vocabulary precisely, even in cases where that vocabulary appears to have been archaic and difficult for later copyists to interpret. They preserved it because someone had told them it mattered, because something in the tradition insisted that the precision of the language was not decorative, that the words were not interchangeable with simpler ones, that what was written was what had happened, and what was written describes a targeted modification of the heritable essence of an existing being, performed at the location of the double strand, producing the creature that is reading this account 4,000 years later. CBS 13532 is in Philadelphia. BM 74329 is in London. The chromosome 7 cluster is in every human being alive on Earth. The Atrahasis text has been translated, published, catalogued, and set on a shelf in the mythology section. The genome of the species it may be describing the origin of has been fully sequenced since 2003. No one in an official position has formally asked whether the procedure described in the oldest written account of human creation and the anomalous gene expression cluster identified in the human genome occupy the same territory. The gap between the two fields is not being maintained by anyone in particular. It is simply never occurring to anyone on either side to look across it. CBS 13532 is still in storage in Philadelphia. The Temu is still in the double strand, and the question the tablet is asking has not changed in 4,000 years. What was done to us, and by whom? Next week we go back to the Enki tablets and read the passage that names the god who performed the procedure, the text that describes what they took out, and the one line that no mainstream translation has ever fully rendered into English. Subscribe before that one goes up. The video on screen covers the related Anunnaki records from the same tradition. Click it before you go.